Was it audible? Was it?
Oh,
Good, good.
raising my hand all the
That's what happens.
Yeah. No,
Oh,
I
you
know.
see,
I know
he's
that phase,
got some
I know
reading
that
here.
phase very well. In some ways it feels like maybe rabbinical schools where you're headed, and on the other hand, you just do not feel prepared to take that commitment on yet.
There's always a
Yeah,
frog.
I know that phase really well.
I haven't seen frogs, no.
Frogs are in the Grimm fairy tales. There's an idea which you trivialize, but it comes at the right moment and it actually leads you to the scintilla of a idea
To the enlightenment or
that you
something.
didn't listen to.
We have competition. Dara's recital is tonight, so the parking lot is full. The building is full of people. Didn't think they were all coming here.
Yeah, what is going on?
There's a Dara, who's a cantorial student, has her senior recital tonight.
Oh.
Yeah.
I felt like there was a party.
She seems to have a big audience.
Yeah. Good for her.
Lorena, how's the book business? Okay, she's still, Lorena's still here. If you haven't got a book, Lorena's still here peddling.
Like hotcakes, they're going.
You good?
So, welcome everyone. I think from what I understand, parking is more problematic tonight than it normally is. That said, I think we'll get started. There's this one line from tonight's tale, which is very elusive to Pesach, in which the daughter of the king pleads with the servant to bring her out of this palace of darkness. So I thought tonight would be a good night for a kind of Pesach-dic marching kind of a niggin. Join in if you know, and if you don't, as soon as you get up to it, please join in. Ya da ya ya da 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 ya ya da ya da 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 ya da
of fantasy. Here we are in the world of the imagination. Well, now you've read a couple of the tales, I hope, for tonight, so you get some sense of what we're talking about here. As I said, storytelling is a part of Hasidism from the beginning. The Baal Shem Tov loved stories, and the idea of the Rebbe as storyteller was something Nachman inherited from the Best and from his family, but also from the milieu. But his stories are different. A Hasidic story is about tzaddikim, or a Hasidic story is somehow rooted in a moshel, in a parable about explaining some idea, explaining some biblical theme. They'll say, well, if this is like so-and-so, they'll tell you a story. These stories have nothing to do with that. They're from a different place. They are fantasy, which is to say they exist solely in the imagination, but that imagination is said to be, no, it's more than the imagination, it somehow is ultimate reality. There is a truth to these stories that can only be pointed to and can then be unpacked forever. You can either understand them with the immediacy of this is my beard, or you can go on telling the tale and explaining the tale forever and ever. They exist in a different realm, so he calls them Sipurei Ma'asiyot Mishanim Kadmoniyot. Tales of things that happened in ancient days. Shanim Kadmoniyot is not only ancient days, but primal days somehow, in the days beyond days. And so he talks about them as tales that exist beyond the realm of 70 years. Most tales that happen, he says, happen within the realm of 70 years. What's 70 years meant to be, do you think? A lifetime, a person's lifetime. Yimesh notenu shivim shana, the psalmist says, the days of our lives are 70 years. Those of us over 70 get nervous when we hear that, but nevertheless, the verse says that you can't change it. So 70 years is a lifetime, but 70 years is also parallel to what they call shivim panim la Torah. The Midrash says the Torah has 70 faces, which is to say there are 70 ways that every word or every letter or every teaching in the Torah can be understood. 70 is a way, of course, of saying lots and lots, multiple. But there are 70 ways in which every verse in the Torah can be understood. There's a great Kabbalistic book called Tikkunei Zohar, a section of the Zohar literature that was written after the rest of the Zohar that tested it out. The Tikkunei Zohar has 70 chapters. Each one is another interpretation of the first verse in Genesis. So let's say, here it is, 70 ways, 70 faces of Torah, let's see them. So they give you 70 different kinds of mystical interpretation of the first verse in Genesis. Somebody else came along later and took a verse in Dvarim somewhere, and I think gave you 252 interpretations. So the idea is multiple. But that's 70 years, 70 faces. That number 7 is a very important Kabbalistic number, because the Sfirot, the 10 primal manifestations of God coming into the world, are divided into two groups. The 7 lower Sfirot are the 7 aspects of the divine person: divine justice, divine mercy, divine compassion, divine eternity, divine power. And those seven are taken to each contain all the truths within them. So those 7 times 10 are 70. So 70 faces, 70 years also means within the realm of what you might imagine God is, or what you might imagine God's world is. Somehow they're tales that are within the 70 years are tales that have some root somewhere. You can imagine them coming out of a biblical story. You can imagine them coming out of a verse. You can imagine them being part of an interpretation. But these tales are different. These tales are from Shanim Kadmoniyot, from the primal years, which is to say from the upper 3 Sfirot. The upper 3 Sfirot are essentially unknowable. They're the primal inner mind of God as it begins to develop, as it begins to turn toward what will be the creation of the world. There's no world yet, but it's the inward turn of God, the inward mind of God, churning out its process until finally the 7 lower Sfirot are born of it. So this inner mind is somehow considered a mysterious realm. The realm of the 3 Sfirot are Keter, Chochmah, and Binah. They're the earliest stages of divinity. And these stories that come from there, they're stories that don't have any connection to our world. They come from they take place in some other dimension. And when you read Nachman's tales, that's what they are. They're tales that take place in a different dimension of reality. They're not a particular country, they're not a particular time. When did they happen? Once there was. Once there was. Where did they happen? No place in particular. Only in one of the 13 stories in the book is there a character who's Jewish. Most of them don't seem to have any particular relationship to what you might call Judaism. Yes? You go into a palace, a strange palace, and you sit down and eat something, nobody asks is it kosher. Right? There's no, who's the caterer? You know, there's nothing of the Jewish world. Remember how deeply Jewish a world Nachman lives in, where everything is controlled by sort of the forces of halakha. That's completely disappeared. We're somehow existing in a different realm where none of that matters anymore. And yet at the same time, there is some great, profound truth being told in these stories. Remember, the Breslovers sit down, as I said, every week, Shabbos afternoon, and try to interpret another one or another fragment of one of these stories in some different way. Here's a book put out by one of the later Breslov Hasidim in the late 19th century called Bir Halikutim. It's a commentary on Nachman's teachings. And he tells you about this first tale we're going to look at. This tale is a kind of introduction to all the other tales. And it says that when he traveled to Navrich in the summer of 1806, then he was almost ready to bring back the daughter of the king into redemption, and the soul of the Messiah would have come. But the evil one, his forces, managed to prevent his thought, and didn't let him do it. And then he fell again, and then he began to tell the story. So there's something here about the mysterious process of redemption that has to do with this. I think I told you last time, Nachman decides the reason Messiah hasn't come, the reason his great desire to bring the redemption in 1806 failed, was people's minds weren't ready. They weren't ready to imagine what it would be like to live in a redeemed world. And so I said in this chapter that I hope you read part of, Nachman has a switch in the way he thinks about these issues. In early Nachman teachings, you have koach hamidameh. The force of imagination is a negative. You have to overcome it. You have to use your mind to overcome your imagination, because your imagination will lead you into temptation. And the rational mind, the mind of the teachings, has to overcome it. And then he realizes that that's failed. He can no longer do it. He can't do it by teachings alone. So what he wants to do is give you a new imagination. He wants to fight fire with fire. If imagination is what leads you astray, I'm going to give you a better and richer and more powerful imagination in the direction of holiness. And that imagination will be the tool by which you will overcome your evil imagination, your wayward imagination. So I just want to read you just a little bit of that. If you have the book in front of you on page 342. As prophecy spreads forth, the imaginative faculty is purified and restored. This is the meaning of Biyad HaNevi'im Adameh. The verse is Biyad, it's from Hosea, Biyad HaNevi'im Adameh. I am imagined by the prophets. But he means prophecy allows you to imagine me. Prophecy brings about imagination of me. The imagination can only be restored by the prophets. Now, can Nachman claim to be a prophet? Of course not. That's treif, yes? Prophecy has been taken away since the temple was destroyed. Prophecy has been removed. There is no prophecy. And yet at the same time, he sort of half takes on that mantle without really saying it. He is claiming something of the role of the prophet. By the way, that's got a very interesting history. Who is a prophet? Can you be a prophet in Judaism? In the 20th century, you see a whole series of people writing about prophecy, writing about the phenomenon of prophecy. None of them claims to be a prophet, but they're all very involved with studying the prophets. And as you look back at them, an Israeli scholar, Eli Schweid, wrote a beautiful essay on this. When you look back at them, you see that's their way of being prophets. Achad Ha'am, Yechezkel Kaufman, Martin Buber, Abraham Joshua Heschel, they all write on the prophets. And their way, because somehow in between the lines of their studying the prophets, you can see that they are sort of half claiming to be prophets. Heschel wrote an essay many years ago Ha'emin ha'Rambam she'egia linvuah. Did Maimonides believe he had attained prophecy? And everybody said the real subject of that essay was that Heschel believed he had attained prophecy. The imagination can only be restored by the prophets. When this takes place, true and holy faith can also be restored. So faith depends on imagination. You can't have faith unless you can imagine it. Well, that's a very interesting concept of faith. Is faith about truth or is faith about imagination? Is faith a way to say, I believe it's true, or I dream that it's true, I fantasize that it's true? Nachman is saying both somehow. The truth of faith is really a truth that you can only come to by means of imagination. Faith exists only where intellect ceases. Only there does man need faith. Faith exists only where intellect ceases. Only there does a person need faith. You understand? Knowledge can go so far, but then you can't go any farther. Then all you can have is faith. So therefore, faith needs something other than the rational mind. Faith needs the imagination to give birth to it, to allow it to come forth. So when we say something is, oh, that's not true, that's just fantasy. No, not for Nachman. That's not true, right? That's just fantasy. How do you say it the other way around? That's not fantasy, it's merely true. It's merely fact, it's not fantasy. Because fantasy is a deeper truth. You see, Nachman, remember, is a thinker. I think I told you last time, Nachman is a thinker who has been to the place where there is no God. He's been through the world where you can have belief in God, see the hand of God, but then he's also been to the void, been to the place where there is no God. And he has to say, how can there be a place where there is no God, since God created everything and God is everywhere? So he has to say, in truth, God is not there in that empty space. But then he has a new category, about be'emet la'amito, who can mean makomo. So the distinction between truth and the truth of truths. Truth and the deeper truth. In fact, in our ordinary perception, if we look around, we don't see God there. We see a world devoid of God. But nevertheless, in some deeper way, God is there. But how do we know that? We know that by the imagination. We know that by letting our imagination go there. And only that imaginative faculty will lead us to that deeper truth. So that's why I say that Nachman is a thinker who goes to the place that I call the place of mythic reality.
I'm hung up on whether you would know truth by accepting fantasy or whether fantasy is true. I'm thinking of dreams.
Mm-hmm. They're dangerous. They can lead you all kinds of dangerous places.
For Jung, I'm a Jungian.
Mm-hmm.
But for Jung, the dream was true.
Mm-hmm.
It was true. You didn't know truth by accepting it. It was true.
For Nachman,
whether you accepted it or not.
For Nachman, these stories are true.
Are true.
But what do they mean? What does that dream mean? Then you can go on and begin interpreting it. 70 ways. Yeah. So where do these stories come from? They come from that primal place within, that place that is beyond ordinary realms of knowledge. They come from those shanim kadmoniyot, those prior unknowable years. But they seem to take place in this other realm. The word myth has a long history of discussion as to what it means. In modern history of religions, there are long treatises on what we mean by myth. What I mean here, I'm just going to give you a brief definition that will be our sort of a working definition for us. A myth is a story that takes place in some mysterious realm that bears within it a truth that you couldn't know except through the myth. If I told you that truth in scientific prose, it would lie flat. It wouldn't go to the depths of where the myth goes. It wouldn't really convey that truth. The truth can only be conveyed by the myth. Therefore, the myth leads you to a deeper inner place, or to a deeper level of reality than normative prose and scientific prose can possibly go. So it's a tale that contains a truth that only it knows. And that truth is a truth that can be read on multiple levels at once. It's a truth about the world, and it's a truth about the soul. It's got an inward reading, it's got a cosmic reading, and you never quite plumb its full depth, because as you explain it, you explain it in prose. And once you explain it in prose, you've already taken something away from it. So the myth is no longer quite the living myth once you've got an explained myth. You go back to it and discover yet another dimension of it, and that's why Nachman's disciples can go on forever reinterpreting these stories, because they come from that place of myth. So in a certain sense, Nachman is beginning again. He's beginning his enterprise over again when he says to his students, I will now start telling you stories. But my teachings haven't worked, I haven't perfected the imagination, I haven't reached you in some ways on a deep enough plane. And that's why redemption hasn't happened. You, of course, he means the world. He wants to talk to the whole world. To talk to the whole world, he has to talk to all the Jews. To talk to all the Jews, he has to talk to his little group of maybe 20 disciples in Breslov. He's going to get to them first, and then the concentric circles are going to go out and conquer the world. Nachman, as I say, has a kind of grandiose side about him. He talks about how there was a certain tzaddik in the world. He says everybody in the world has a certain amount of malchus in him. Malchus means regal quality, but also authority. Everybody has a certain amount of authority. Some people have authority over their household. Some people have authority over a whole town. Then he says there's one person in the world who seems to have no authority over anybody, but in truly secret ways he rules the entire world. And you know he's talking about himself. You know he's got some kind of hidden vision that he is the tzaddik of his generation, that he is the ruler of the world. But nobody knows it yet. So how do I get this secret out? And he gets the secret out, of course, by telling stories. So we're going to read a story in a little while, but I think what I want you to do first is with this story of the king's daughter, I want you to take a partner, find a chevruta for 10 minutes or so, and I want you to tell one another what you think this story is about before we begin together. You've read the story of the loss of the king's daughter. Everybody's read it, pretty much? Okay, good. So find yourself a partner. Maybe somebody you don't know in the room. Get up and walk around. Find a partner whom you wouldn't ordinarily talk to. Avoid your spouse. And spend 5 minutes each. Spend 5 minutes each telling each other what you think this story is about. And we'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll begin a collective reading. Jordan is going to give you some guidance, though. Before you begin, Jordan's going to give you some guidance as to how you might conduct this conversation.
Yeah, and I'll just hand out some potential questions if you need some extra inspiration for.
This is inspiration for your conversation. Questions to ask. Can we have one of those? Questions to ask and thinking about the story. You can relate to these questions or not, but where do you think the story is? Keep an eye on the clock. Oh, I have one of those too. But then you can bring if you turn it on. What I have in here, notes from 1971, 1977, reading of the Yusuf movie to the Malah. 1977, Chacham Batam, notes from class discussion. Character of the Chacham, character of the time, levels of interpreting the story. Dean Steinfeld's commentary summary.
Yeah, which other ones you got in there?
I have Quanim Sheneklefu. What's Villa? Baruch Shalom, 1971, admissions meeting. Danny Matt, thanks to stand with the good with Danny Matt. שאלת יסוד בספרי מעשיות. מוטיב הגאולה האחרונה. שבירה בגלות. מוטיבים אישיים לעניין הגאולה. סיפור ברגר ואני, היה אישיותו של משיח. סיפור בשם רבי אלימלך. איך נאמר במסכת סוכה שהרגו חז"ל את היצר הרע של עבודה זרה? אומר רבי אלימלך, הפכו את תפקידו של אותו מלאך להיות יצר הרע לרדיפת ממון ומיסודות בעל תפילה. זין בטלך, כולם מתאימים לזין ספירות ולשיבה רואים, גם לשיבה רואים כקמצנים. הסיפורים שלו יש two על משטח, יש two על משטח אחד, יש חלקים של גיבורים, ויש חלקים אלגוריים, ריאליסטיים, ורבים יחד. הרע בבעל תפילה הוא הקיצוניות, יותר מדי הוא רע, בכל עניין חוץ מאמונה. בעל תפילה כפירוש לקידוש הכתר, צריך עיון. etc. Ik was de landkaart in de Torah. Die het gehad van de zaak Moshe Torah. Dat hier niet waar, zo dat al hayada fabrikaat. Als je dat dan Moshe. Anyway, I thought I had one of these for the Bat Melech, but it's gone. Niet meer zo ring dat in. Hoe het hier in de winkel.
On the one hand, they're generated from Japanese and on the other hand, they're relaying the Shekhinah being rent away from the body.
Yeah, the Shrif had moved away beyond the Shekhinah, but never. Yeah, so.
I guess they probably already preemptively know her tale.
Should we get a give a little bit?
Oh yeah.
Just met him here tonight?
Yeah, he's such a cute guy.
Yes. He is the nephew, maybe, of Joey Glick's girlfriend. At the same time. Can I give you and then you have to do it more powerfully. And I think you have to come out stronger. I mean, do what you want, but that's my feedback. I think they needed to come from me. Did you do the Mishnah verses?
Yep, it's on the back of the.
Oh, good, good, good. Yeah, the translation doesn't quite get where he's going with it, I think. See? That's the problem.